Good morning, can I help you? There you go, have a great day.
The wind cut sharp through the narrow street that morning, but Naomi Carter had learned long ago that the cold didn't care whether you were ready for it or not. She wrapped her fingerless gloves tighter around the handle of her wooden cart and arranged the last of her pies on the top shelf, their golden crusts catching the pale winter light. She had no idea that in the next 60 seconds, a single glance from a stranger would tear open a wound she had spent 10 years trying to bury, and would change the rest of her life forever. If stories like this move you, stories about second chances, about kindness finding its way back to people who never stopped deserving it, take a moment right now to like this video, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to Kindness Corner so you never miss what happens next. Now, let's continue. 10 years earlier, Naomi Carter had been someone entirely different. She had been engaged to a young man named Julian Cross, a quiet, hard-working dreamer who spent his nights sketching business plans on napkins and his days working 2 jobs to save enough for a small apartment they could call their own. They had nothing but each other, and back then, that had felt like enough. But one rainy October night, a car accident on the interstate changed everything. Naomi woke up in a hospital 3 states away, her memory of the crash shattered, her identification lost, her family unreachable. By the time she was well enough to try to find her way home, she discovered that home no longer existed the way she remembered it. Julian, she was told by a nurse who had seen the news, had been declared to have lost someone in that same crash, a woman whose body was never recovered from the wreckage. Naomi did not know that the missing woman the report spoke of was her. She only knew that she had no money, no papers, and no way to prove who she used to be. What followed were 10 hard years of quiet survival. Naomi drifted through shelters and short-term jobs, patched together a life out of whatever kindness the world offered her, and eventually found peace in the one thing her grandmother had taught her as a little girl, baking. She started small, selling homemade pies from a borrowed cart on a busy sidewalk in the city, the same recipe her grandmother once used, the crust flaky and golden, the filling rich with cinnamon and love. It wasn't much. It didn't pay for a real home. But it gave her dignity, and dignity, she had learned, was worth more than comfort. Meanwhile, Julian Cross had rebuilt his life in a very different direction. The napkin sketches he once made as a broke young man had eventually become blueprints for a logistics company that changed how small businesses shipped goods across the country. Over the years, that company grew into an empire, and Julian became one of the city's most recognized young billionaires. But wealth had never filled the hole that Naomi's disappearance left in him. He had searched for her in the early years, hospitals, shelters, missing persons databases, until well-meaning friends and grief counselors convinced him that closure meant letting go. He built walls around that pain instead of speaking of it, wore expensive suits instead of grief, and told himself that the woman with the warm brown eyes and the gentle laugh existed now only in memory. That morning, Julian had stepped out of a downtown meeting early, choosing to walk a few blocks instead of calling his driver, needing air after a long and difficult negotiation. His path took him down a street he rarely visited, past small cafes and vendors he never noticed, until his eyes landed, almost by accident, on a woman standing behind a modest wooden pie cart. She was adjusting a tray, her curly hair falling loose from its bun, her brow furrowed in quiet concentration exactly the way it used to when she was baking as a young woman. Julian slowed his steps. Something about the shape of her face, the way she tilted her head, stopped him cold in the middle of the sidewalk. He told himself it was impossible. He told himself grief was playing tricks on tired eyes. But then she looked up, startled by the stranger staring at her, and their eyes met. It was her eyes that undid him completely, the same warm brown eyes he had memorized 10 years ago across a candlelit table on the night he proposed, the same eyes that had haunted every quiet moment since the accident. Naomi froze too, pie still balanced in her hands, a strange and unexplainable ache rising in her chest as she stared back at this well-dressed stranger who somehow felt achingly familiar. Neither of them spoke for what felt like an eternity, the noise of the street fading into the background as two broken halves of the same story stood only a few feet apart, neither one yet able to believe what their hearts already recognized. Julian took a step closer, his voice catching in his throat as he asked her name, though somewhere deep inside he already knew the answer before she gave it. And when Naomi said her name aloud, something in Julian's chest broke wide open, a decade of grief and disbelief crashing over him all at once. He told her who he was, watched the recognition slowly bloom across her face, watched her hands begin to tremble as pieces of a life she thought she had lost forever started falling back into place. For 10 years, both of them had carried the same loss without knowing the other was still alive to carry it with them. What followed in the days after was not a fairy tale ending handed to them, but something far more meaningful, a slow, careful rebuilding of trust, memory, and love between two people who had grown into entirely different versions of themselves. Julian did not simply sweep Naomi away into a life of luxury and erase the woman she had become. Instead, he learned to admire her, her strength, her resilience, the quiet pride she took in her pies and the life she had built brick by brick out of nothing. And Naomi, in turn, allowed herself to grieve the 10 lost years while also opening her heart to the possibility that love, real love, does not always disappear, sometimes it simply waits. If this story moved something in you, if it reminded you that love and hope can survive even the longest separations, we would love to hear your thoughts. Please take a moment to comment below and tell us what part of Naomi and Julian's story touched you the most. And before we close this chapter, we have one small request. If you believe that kindness always finds its way home, type the words, "I believe," in the comments right now. It only takes a second, but it means the world to this community. In the end, Naomi Carter's story reminds us that a person's worth is never defined by how little they have, and that sometimes, the family we thought we lost forever is only ever one crowded sidewalk away from finding us again. If this story touched your heart even a little, please like this video, share it with someone who needs a reminder that hope is never truly gone, and subscribe to Kindness Corner for more stories that remind us why kindness always matters.